everyone. Welcome. My name's Rosie Klich. I am your host for this panel on creative change in uncertain time, theatrical innovation in the pandemic. Welcome particularly to our speakers. We've got Kelly Jones, Dylan Frankland and Rosemary Jenkinson. Welcome to our wonderful creative doodler, Katie. Katie is going to be scribbling, jotting down some visual representations of our conversation today. Welcome, Katie. Hello. Great to have you here. Hi. So a few quick housekeeping notes. Please note that this session is being recorded for documentation purposes. Live transcription is available, which you can enable via the Zoom menu bar at the bottom by selecting the closed captions live transcript options. So we are going to hear from each of our invited speakers first up, and then at the end of their talks, we'll have some Q&A. So you'll be able to ask questions using the button on the Zoom bar that says Q&A. And we do need to keep to time in this session. It's an hour, so we may not be able to answer all the questions, but we do have another discussion forum immediately after this session, which won't be recorded, and that's to just continue the conversation. Just to explain, each of the speakers in this panel have been asked to talk about, from their own personal perspective, about their experiences of where there have been creative opportunities and where there might be future creative opportunities over the last couple of years and into the future. So change here can be understood in a number of ways and could relate to audiences, new collaborations, individual practices. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Kelly Jones. Kelly is a benefit class playwright and theatre maker from Dagenham. She was the winner of the BBC Drama Award and named in the Stage's Ones to Watch list in 2018. She has recently completed the invite-only Emerging Playwrights programme at the Bush Theatre and is currently on High Tide's Playwrights cohort and Mercury Theatre's Essex Voices programme. She writes autobiographically with an emphasis on queerness, class, and her relationship to home. Recent credits include a Bump with High Tide Theatre and the New Wolsey, Room to Escape with BBC Arts, Comma with the Sherman Theatre, Garden Paradiso with the Mercury Theatre, and Tammy with Queen's Theatre Hornchurch. She is currently on the BBC's Drama Room and has work in development with the Bush, the Mercury Theatre, and Wales Millennium Centre. Over to you, Kelly.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone. You're right. It's such a lovely day. It's so nice. Thanks for having me to speak today. I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experience of the pandemic and then things that I learned and things that I'm taking forward into my work from now on. I want to start by saying that I am predominantly a playwright and theatre maker, although I have always felt that my role isn't as clearly defined as that. Sometimes I am a poet, a video game writer, transcriber, sound engineer, basically whatever I'm asked to do. As a underclass artist, I'm kind of used to the hustle and bustle and never-ending shape-shifting that comes with trying to survive in this industry. I'm pretty sure that everyone knows what I'm talking about. We've kind of all been doing it since day dot, and it will unfortunately continue. It's unfortunate, but in order to survive, we have to diversify and be open to working in all different mediums. I'd love to sit in my pajamas and just write plays all day, but that's just not possible. When the pandemic happened, in some ways I felt quite lucky because I didn't have loads of work penned in. I was going through a time where I didn't have a lot of work and was substituting my income with teaching and then temp work here and there, which obviously all closed down because of COVID. It was kind of hard to begin because now the pool of people hustling for scraps of paid work included some of the biggest names in theatre land. Coupled with trying to stay safe, say well, avoid COVID. I was looking after my parents as well. To begin, I found the pandemic quite hard, like I'm sure most people did. And I found theatre Twitter quite overwhelming. It felt like everyone was applying for everything, seeing all the free online work, while I was focused on making money and how I was going to pay my bills. I didn't have the time or privilege to sit online mourning the overnight loss of the industry. And I decided that social media wasn't helpful for me or my well-being at that time. So I disconnected from it. I kind of feared that it would mean not being on social media would mean that I'd lose out on work. And I don't know, I probably did. But it was what I needed to do at that time. And since kind of things have started getting back to normal, I've kind of stayed off it because I find it makes me much more productive. There were a lot of opportunities though that I kind of did take advantage of, and I'd love to talk about some of them today and things that have helped me and changed the way in which I work. So the Mercury Theatre, based in Colchester, if you don't know, I was invited onto their playwrights cohort. It was the monthly sessions facilitated by Kenny Emson, connecting with other writers, doing a few exercises. We could write a play if we wanted to, but there was absolutely no pressure to do that. Those sessions gave me a focus and meant that I felt like a writer in a time where that was really hard. And it kind of also helped me to reevaluate my writing process. My usual writing process is to sit at my desk from morning until night and just write. I kind of block out a couple of days in my week where I'm not doing non-theatre work. And those are my writing days. So I just try and get as much done as I can. During the pandemic, I couldn't do that. My focus time was limited. I could only focus for short amounts of time. And I stopped being able to write in order, kind of linearly, this scene, then this happens, then this happens. I kind of started writing moment to moment, just odd moments from within the play in no particular order, in snatches of time where I felt like I could write or fancied a bit of writing. It kind of created a bit of a collagey feel to my work, and was really playful. I really loved it and found it quite freeing. That's kind of something that I have continued to do and has revitalized my writing process in a way that I didn't even know that I needed. So I suppose that was a real kind of positive, because I hadn't ever had the time to sit and look at my writing process and go, how do I make work? Is this the best way for me? And this kind of helped me find that. The play that I wrote during that time is being produced next year, so that's quite good, silver linings. I was invited onto the High Tide Theatre's playwrights cohort as well. And it was a COVID care cohort for playwrights. It was not writing focused. It was more about checking in on us, hosting group like wellbeing sessions, and asking us what we needed. It has taught me some valuable lessons in self-care and was refreshing because it wasn't about writing or plays. It was just about artists and asking us what we needed, which we never get asked. And it was going, it's okay if you can't write at this time, because there's all these other people that also feel like that. The kind of self-care tools that I learned on that from those group sessions are things that I've kind of taken into my professional life ever since. It's really nice. The big project that I took on during lockdown was a commission from BBC Arts and National Theatre Wales. It was a digital project about connecting communities during the pandemic. I have previously done a bit of digital work, like bits and bobs, but nothing as big as this and nothing involving community. I found out about it from a previous collaborator. Me and her had kind of spoken about this idea a really long time ago. And we were like, oh, one day if something comes up, we'll apply with it. We wanted to bring theatre to people in their homes through their letterboxes, with props that could morph their houses into theatres for the evening. And we were kind of looking at people who live in like social isolation or people with mental health issues. And we decided to apply for this thing, and then by fluke we got it. And then we created the project called Room to Escape. Now, with Room to Escape, we engaged with 5 families during lockdown. We did it all through Zoom and post. All of the families were families with key workers in them as well. We run individual workshops with each family in their homes, collaborating with them to create stories that they wanted to tell using a mix of household objects and props created through workshops with our set designer. The performances were then streamed online from their homes, one after another. And to this day, it is the best thing that I have ever worked on. It was pure magic. And at a time when the world was chaos, it gave those families something special. It felt normal to be making work and was a real lesson in how to engage young children on Zoom for more than 10 minutes, which is how things are kind of moving forward anyway. A lot of the workshops now are being hosted on Zoom. Meetings are kind of being hosted on Zoom. It's something that I really love, actually, about what happened, is that it has made us relook at how we make things like that more accessible. Because sometimes, like, it's really expensive to travel into London for a day for a meeting, but then actually you can have that meeting at your home, and people are more open to offering that now because of the pandemic. I think the thing that surprised me the most about the pandemic was the temporality of what we do. It can all be gone. And despite that, I'm still going, simply because of the generosity of the organisations that I've just mentioned. I wrote more than I thought I would, and I created things that I think are some of my best work. My process is kind of changed because of it, and it's reignited some new collaborations for me. The pandemic did, however, for me, highlight the classist gap that exists within our industry and how wide that gap is. I hope that it has made people more aware of that and things that they can do in order to narrow that gap. I have to say, I saw more theatre than I ever have, because a lot of people were releasing their shows online for free or for kind of pay what you can and things like that. And actually it meant that I got to see shows. I got to see a lot of shows because I didn't also have to budget for train fare on top of that, or having a day off work. So actually I feel like that was really great and is a great way of engaging new audiences in theatre who may go, I would love to go to the theatre, but actually it's too expensive. If we can do more of that, it may kind of narrow that gap even wider. So I really hope that that is something that remains from all of this. And that's kind of everything that I've got today. If you had any questions or anything like that, just let me know. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I think we'll actually hold questions till the end. I've got loads. It's so wonderful to hear you talking about not just managing to be productive, but being really proud of the work that you've created as well during the pandemic. Thank you so much. We'll definitely come back to you with questions. I should just explain all of if I've got a lot of noise in the background, I live opposite a school, like right next to a school, and it's really warm today, so I've got the windows open, so I haven't got 50 kids in the room with me. I promise. It's just a very noisy school next door. Brilliant. Okay, on to our next speaker, Dylan Frankland. Dylan is a freelance theatre maker, performer, producer, and co-artistic director of award-winning interactive theatre company Kill the Cat. His work uses interaction to tackle social issues, giving audiences agency and choice, and placing them at the heart of the action. Above all, his work creates a shared sense of community and play. Since lockdown, his practice has explored how to create communal, interactive experiences online, including creating the award-winning The House Never Wins, which we're incredibly lucky to have as part of our event program tomorrow night. Bookings are available via the Freelancers in the Dark website for 7 and 9 p.m. tomorrow night. Over to you, Dylan.
Hello, yes, so I'm Dylan, pronouns he, him. So yeah, in terms of what I was sort of going to focus on today, my face has now gone super large on Zoom in terms of the webinar. It's like I'm talking to myself, weirdly. Yeah, I think about my experience, and largely it's sort of tied up with my company's experience in running my company during the pandemic. We were an emerging theatre company, and I use that in that whatever way that means. But we were a company originally. We were founded in the Southwest. I'm from Cornwall. We started the company whilst we were after having graduated from Exeter University, and we'd done a tour of one production, which was about mental health and performed in pubs. But we were still trying to sort of like find our way of like building our reputation, getting our foot in the door with a lot of venues, which is like hard. And weirdly, I feel quite lucky in terms of how my work shifted once the pandemic happened, because I feel like it actually opened up a lot of doors for us. Because within a week of lockdown being implemented in the UK, we did our first work in progress version of The House Never Wins online. And that's not because we were like super keen or we'd got really bored really early on. It was because we'd just begun R&D, and we'd been really lucky to get some funding to start that R&D process, to create it as an in-person show. And we started our rehearsals on the day that all the theatres shut. So we had one day in a space before we had to pack up and go home, like flee. It was very strange. But the artistic director of Make Tank, Olia, who was running the space next to where we were rehearsing, she'd done a lot of work with the university, Exeter, and they were all trying to work out how they were going to put their lectures online. So she just said to us, you're like, well, you're meant to be doing an R&D at the end of this week. Do you fancy trying to do that online? And so it just kind of just happened out of necessity that we had to do this thing and deliver this thing. But in many ways, that was great, because it meant that we viewed that as a creative challenge rather than we got nothing else and we're bored and we're stuck at home. What are we going to do about it? So we did that work in progress online, and we really enjoyed it. And so we just kept on going. And then eventually it's got to the stage where we've done 4 digital UK tours of different theatres, and 4 international festivals, and we've reached over 1,000 audiences across the world, all from our bedroom, which is insane, and really lovely. It's a very surreal experience doing a show in your bedroom and then everyone leaving and nothing happening and just being like, oh, that's it. And we've toured to these different venues and these different spaces, but it's all the same because we're at home. But I think there's been lots of benefits to that for both us as a company and me as a maker, in that we've been able to reach new audiences. We've been able to reach international audiences, which is something that we would never have the opportunity to have done otherwise, because of finance, because of gatekeepers. Also as a company that are trying to be more climate aware in our work and trying to make work as sustainably as possible. The idea that we can reach audiences across the globe without having to get on a plane is amazing, and really does just open up what we're able to do. We've been able to develop relationships with different venues that we, again, weren't able to get past those gatekeepers before. And there was I remember before pandemic, there being lots of conversations with venues going, oh, okay, well, we have to have supported your work previously or seen your work previously before we can support you. And going, okay, well, I've got this show, will you put that on? No. We're like, and so just going into all those catch-22. And then suddenly we were in a position where we kind of held a bit more power, because venues started approaching us going, I've heard you've got this this Zoom show. Oh, can we have it? And so it changed that power dynamic between us and venues. Basically, it felt like it was kind of like a really good Edinburgh run, because we had been thinking about going to Edinburgh in 2020, and obviously been trying to weigh up like the financial implications of that and going there for a month, and then so that's a month off work, or month for not being paid, and then all the costs of the venue hire. And then suddenly we kind of got everything that we could have hoped for out of that Edinburgh run, just from doing it online and being able to collaborate with people, which was amazing. I should say, for a little bit of context in terms of how the piece actually works. So The House Never Wins, it's a piece about climate crisis and gambling for the planet that is set in a virtual online casino, where the audience are playing what is a seemingly innocent game of blackjack, whilst also trying to protect the planet. And there's also a real cash prize at the end of it. But I think what helped us in terms of adapting this for online, and what it's changed my practice, was that we're able, because we're an interactive theatre company, I think that moving to a digital realm actually is really beneficial and really fits with the form, because the mediums that we use to engage online, so laptops, phones, these are all interactive devices, so we're used to it, and as an audience member we're expecting to be able to do multiple things. We're not expecting just to sit there as a passive audience member. So as soon as you start giving an audience member choice and going, okay, we'll click on this link, do this, they respond to that, I think, in a better way. And I think there was a lot of talk during 2020 and 2021 about what is it that makes online work, and online work. And I think a lot of people were trying to put it on liveness. And I think that's kind of a misnomer, because I don't think it's about it being live. I think it's about the audience's presence mattering. And I think interactive theatre does that well, because you give audiences choice, and without them, the piece isn't the same. Their impact is completely different. So every show is completely different. And I think with it being a focus on liveness, I think that is a red herring, because I think we've got to view what we're gaining from digital rather than just trying to replicate theatre. And yes, theatre has to be live when it's in person, because we're in a physical space, right? And so we've got to meet people at a certain time. But if you're doing it online and then you only make it live, and it's just because, and the audience are passive, and it's not because there's an interactive need or something that they need to be doing at a certain time, then you're just putting up barriers to your work unnecessarily. So whether that's access, whether that's childcare, you're reducing actually the amount of people who can see your work. Whereas I think what we need, and I hope is something that we retain, and the industry retains, is that it's looking at digital and online work as just another tool to theatre. It's not a replacement for in-person theatre. I'm really excited to be back in in-person spaces and to be moving into making that type of work again. But I don't think we need to forget what we've learned. It's just about viewing it as another tool. And okay, now we have the choice to make something online. It's not out of necessity. It's does this piece benefit from being online? And does that fit thematically? Are you making a piece about, say, about digital culture or about social media, then maybe that should be something that's experienced online. Maybe that would be more relevant than doing it in person. Is it because you want to bring audiences from different points of the globe together? So maybe you want to have an audience in Scotland chatting to an audience in Australia. And if that's the case, then moving your work online is a better format for that. And then you can start viewing the limitations as strengths. And I think that's something that we'd always, that was the real learning curve for us when we were making The House Never Wins the first time, is we were trying to work out all the stuff that was annoying us about having to perform online. We were like, well, how can we get around that? So and one of the things is that if you're a performer online, it's really hard to maintain people's focus. So you can't demand that anyone pays attention to you. You don't have a spotlight, and you can't go, this is really significant, look at this. And even now, whilst I'm talking, I have no idea actually if anyone's paying attention, or if they've got other tabs up, or if they're checking their phone. And I can't stop you. I can't stop you eating your dinner. And like so when we were making The House Never Wins, we were trying to work out like, how could we actually allow there to be the distractions. And so we decided that we were actually going to start distracting the audience ourselves. So the pieces simultaneously on Zoom and WhatsApp, and we'd start distracting you on WhatsApp from the stuff that goes on Zoom, to not only tell an audience that it's okay if they get distracted and the real world bleeds in, but also just to try and add a little bit of dramaturgy to that as well. And I think that's all sort of stuff that is going to sort of like filter into my practice moving forward. I'm not saying I'm only going to make work online, but I feel like it might become a lot of like hybrid work. I think again that really suits making interactive performance. And if I can go to a interactive performance and there's also something for me to do on my phone or engage with on a laptop, great. If there's something that can start before I go to the in-person performance, maybe a few days beforehand, and the performance can actually start earlier, then amazing. We can immerse people in the world so much more. We can have more things for an audience to do. And likewise with the end, means that the end of a performance where everyone has to go home and travel back doesn't actually have to be the end. But my work, where we're specifically trying to tackle social or political issues, that's really helpful, because the ending is always really key to us, because how you transition an audience from going, oh, that was entertaining, I had a good time at the theatre, to actually thinking about the message that you're talking about. That's kind of the key, because you want them to then think about how those issues resonate further in their life. But if we're able to contact people after the event, then that gives us more options that we can do that, in terms of giving people access to groups or petitions or further resources. We have that more at our fingertips when we're sort of viewing sort of like hybrid in-person to online work. So that's pretty much everything I was going to say. I think lastly, just to sort of touch on in terms of like change I'd like to see in the industry moving forward, is I just hope we don't forget everything that we've learned over these past 2 years. We've had really good conversations about access and diversity and sustainability, and I hope that we keep hold of all of those. I hope that we keep hold of the skills that we've learned in terms of making online or digital work. And obviously there's going to be a rush for like in-person performance now, and that's fine and that's good, and that is what should happen. I think we've all hit that point of like online fatigue, but we can keep the good bits. We don't have to just bin everything that we've done and put effort into over the last 2 years. And I think finally, I just hope that venues still keep on taking risks and keeping those sort of like those open door policies. And I think a few venues are beginning to go back to those models of, we'll only program you if we've got an existing relationship with you, or if we're directly involved in this piece. But I hope they keep the sort of the more open door policy of, okay, we can take risks on this thing. What do people have? Because I think that benefits us all as a artistic community. But yeah, that's me. And then happy to chat any more when we get to questions later.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. Thank you so much. I think it would be really interesting to talk more about that changing relationship with organisations and venues, and more about your hopes for what that could be in the future. You know, part of this project was about making recommendations, and I think it would be great to hear more from you on that. I thought it was also really interesting to talk about how you're trying to look at the affordances of the media that you're working with, and use the right medium for the particular experience that you're looking to have with audiences, which I think sounds super savvy, and yeah, really keen to unpack that a bit more in questions. But we are now going to move on to our last but not least speaker, Rosemary Jenkinson. Rosemary is a playwright and short story writer from Belfast. She was the 2017 Artist in Residence at the Lyric Theatre and is an Arts Council Major Artist. A selection of her wonderful oeuvre of plays include The Bonefire, which was winner of the Stuart Parker BBC Radio Award, The Winners, Johnny Meister and the Stitch, Basra Boy, Planet Belfast, Lives in Translation, May the Road Rise Up, Michelle and Arlene, White Star of the North, and Here Comes the Night. Her latest play is Billy Boy, which will be touring to Edinburgh this year, and she is currently writing a new play called Manikia for the Abbey Theatre. Rosemary, please correct me on that pronunciation.
It's Manikia or Manichaea. I think it's tomato, so you're grand, whatever you say.
Brilliant, thank you. Over to you.
Great. Yeah, so, God, what more can I add? Yeah, last March, total devastation. I mean, I'm a traditional playwright, sort of hoping to get always commissions and theatres in a conventional theatre space, or in a not conventional theatre space. But yeah, so it was as bad as being Shakespeare, really, but even worse, because in those days they used to actually take more risks going out and about. But here we were so kind of bound to our houses, and I had so much going on in 2020. I was going to have Billy Boy in the summer, a production with East Side Arts Festival. I was planning to go to the USA on tour with another play. So it was all go, and then the crash came. And to be honest, I was so sort of devastated with all this that I write books, short story collections. So I kind of moved very much into prose writing and just forgot about theatre for a while. And then, so I forgot. And then by the end of the year, I was kind of like, I have to go back to theatre. So I went to the Abbey Theatre and asked them, could you commission me? And then that started me off. So I did get a commission, and then there were different things that were happening with that weren't traditional. For instance, Irish Theatre Institute then invited me to write an essay on what is a play, because we were actually thinking about what is a play now. Is it digital? Can a digital play be a play? That was what the Irish playography was not at that point putting digital plays on their playography website. So I think it was like we tried to sort of argue that a digital play is a real play and has the same value, even though I think hardly any digital plays would have got published in book form over the past 2 years. I mean, that's what I kind of wonder, because obviously audiences in the theatre are the people who buy the books. So therefore, there was no demand for books really of plays, play texts. So anyway, other things, finally with Billy Boy, we decided to do it via, well, Eastside Arts decided to do it via film. So we filmed it, and it was great because it was a one-man show. It was jump cut. There was lots of Zoom. So it was fast paced. It was able to have the fast pace that you could have on a stage. So much of the Zoom plays that were on were too static, really. I think if they were on a conventional stage, so it felt static, but I was very pleased with mine. And in fact, it meant that we got the live show out in 2021 in the summer. And then I could also, we had it as part of the Belfast Film Festival, a premiere. So therefore the film could relive, it could also promote the play. So then when you're in the both worlds, it's so much better, you know. So I find that enriching to be in both film and theatre world together at once. And I didn't mind. I had to do a lot of Zoom research with community groups, and initially I was quite worried about this because I thought they'll never kind of open up or anything. And I think that is one of the problems with Zoom research. You don't get the kind of real casual conversations in the corner, and that's the problem with Zoom. I mean, just right now, I would like to sort of go to a bar with the 4 members here. So, and it's impossible because theatre is about the private conversations that you have with people. I think it sparks ideas, and I think, yeah, that was completely missing during COVID. And also one of the big things was that I didn't find that theatre was quick enough to react. We had, in the summer of 2020, COVID numbers were completely down. Theatres could have been doing a lot of shows in non-traditional theatre spaces, but because of our whole funding process that takes months in advance, this couldn't be foreseen. And I felt that a huge opportunity was missed for live productions during that. And I can't understand why we aren't thinking, in case there's another pandemic or another iteration of the same pandemic in a worse way, that we have not got outdoor, sort of semi-outdoor, semi-covered theatre spaces, some kind of globe. Why don't we have that in Belfast so that we can keep going through a pandemic? We have to plan in advance next time how we can move more quickly and how we can have proper spaces to utilize straight away. So I think those are sort of points. I mean, I think what I've come out of this, I think it's been great that I did another film. I was commissioned for another short film And it has helped me sort of develop my writing a bit more in a filmic way, less dialogue, more visual. And those are all good for a playwright to diversify. So I did feel that probably it helps me think a lot more. And I mean, I used to love the old Play for Today in the 70s and 80s when they had film plays, and that has revived that interest. And the monologues that they put on the BBC, I felt that was, I mean, they revived Alan Bennett. I mean, it's just a classic. We should be doing that right now. The BBC should be doing that right now, and that should continue to have monologue plays forever, really, and Play for Today's. So I think that's something. I'm sure there's a lot more I have written down, but yeah. And another thing, it was great. I actually earned more money because of the whole government funding us scheme. And why can't they do that all the time? So the year of COVID was great. This year, not great. So I think the post-COVID blues are a lot worse. Another thing, I know Kelly said about social media. Well, yes, that has been a total terrible sort of thing. People have gone mad on social media and got angry at things, and that has been a very bad thing about COVID, certainly, and it does put you off going on social media. So I think that's unfortunately, we all have to promote our plays, but the social media has become more toxic through COVID, and I hope that is going to change during the next while. Is there anything else? I'm sure there is. Another thing, I mean, Zoom is so cheap. I mean, for instance, we are able to come here and, you know, with the University of Essex setting this up, and you would have to pay for our flights. So, you know, at least we are actually doing things. We're on a public platform and we're here cheaply. So there is that aspect, which is always good. And yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Rosemary. Yeah, cheaply and more environmentally sound as well, as Dylan mentioned. Oh, Katie, look at that. That's amazing. This is some of Katie's responses to what people have been saying. Wow. So much that I love your doodle of each of the speakers. You've really captured something about each of them. Thank you so much, Rosemary, Dylan, Kelly. So much there to talk about. Really, really interesting and insightful and personal. So thank you so much for sharing. So we can actually open up. We have about 20 minutes, I believe, where we can open the floor to questions. And the best way to ask a question is to use the Q&A box on the bottom of the Zoom screen. It's the menu at the bottom. I'll just get that up. I've got loads of questions, so perhaps while we wait for some questions to come in via the chat, I will look down at my enormous collection of. Rosemary, why do you feel at the beginning of the pandemic that actually you didn't want to write theatre but felt that you wanted to write prose and poetry instead? What was that made you just want to turn away from theatre?
I just assumed that it was dead. You know, I had always thought of theatre as totally alive. So I didn't realize that Zoom was going to take off and that we were going to get these opportunities. And I think you know, maybe also I was glad to be in some way, maybe even glad to have a break from theatre. I think some people actually have said that as well. And maybe, you know, it revitalized us. And in a way, because I came to the Abbey and then, you know, I waited until I had a compelling idea. And I think sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're just trying to pump the ideas out and just sort of, but it allowed us time to stay back and to think about society and what we want to say about it.
Yeah, absolutely. A little bit of a pause for reflection, if you will. That certainly did come through the interviews. It was a really mixed bag. Obviously, people like, you know, yourself, everyone's devastated, but at the same time, people talked about escaping the hustle just for a minute.
It was an excuse not to. Yeah, you didn't feel bad about not having things on. You had a ready-made excuse, really. Okay, so nobody has. So I think, but then I kind of realized it was the whole hybrid working was coming on. I thought, oh God, I better jump on. So it did evolve.
Brilliant, thank you. We've just got a question through the chat from Irini Kartsaki. Irini says, thanks everyone, this was so insightful and heartwarming. I felt like there were a lot of ideas around new ways of dealing with our creativity in this time. I wondered if you could each say perhaps what is one of the key creative or otherwise methodologies that you will take forward in your practice in the future. So that's a great question. So I'll hand that over to perhaps Kelly. You might want to start us off in terms of what might be the one kind of key creative change that you're going to take with you into your future working.
I think it's my sort of, but I think to not take it so seriously, actually, because that sounds wild, but sometimes we can go making theatre is kind of can feel life or death, and if you don't get an opportunity, it can be devastating. And I've always struggled with kind of confidence and in my relationship to like imposter syndrome and all stuff like that. And actually I think one of the things that the pandemic taught me was that this could all be gone overnight. So if you're going to do it, love it and make what you want to make, regardless of all the kind of the hoops and the trying to make work that you think people want to see. I think actually for me that was the kind of biggest thing, is going, actually from now on I'm just going to make the work that I want to make. Yeah, I'd say for me that was it.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Same question to Dylan. The one kind of key creative change or facet of your process that you want to take forward into the future?
I mean, there's lots, but I think what sort of kind of sprang to mind is I found that shifting my practice online, I had to think a lot more about the audience's journey through like, how are they even going to get to, like, even just sending like an email out going, here is the link, here is how you're going to engage with this piece, and how you can make that as creative as possible, and how like just thinking about everything you can do for your audience outside of the actual production itself that keeps them in the world that you want them to do, that gives them the best experience, and how you can make those all part of the piece. And even down to it was just, I think for us it was just a real just the focus on the audience was just paramount, because we weren't in the same space as them. We had to really think about that in a lot more detail, and just thinking about how you can look after your audience, how like trying to anticipate any need that they might have, like both access wise but also just like creatively, when you're like, they need to have a change here, that this has to happen. And just I think our work is always strongest when we're focusing on the audience, and it just kind of really emphasized that, I think, for me.
I think that's so interesting. I think when you're in a venue, the lobby, the foyer does so much of that work for you, and you haven't got that if you're working on a digital platform. So creating that kind of journey of immersion into a piece, keeping them in the world, I think was your phrase. We've seen some really interesting strategies from practitioners trying to do that. Really cool. Brilliant, thank you. Rosemary, same question to you. So putting your finger on the one key creative change that you want to take forward.
Okay, keep diversifying really, and try to anticipate what is wanted and needed really in writing. I know, for instance, what I'm doing is that I'm now in talks with a film producer about, because Billy Boy started its creative journey as a film, now I'm in talks about how I can do a full full-length film with a full cast. So I think those are great ways. I've probably met more people, so it's really about trying to widen my network. And also, I mean, I know you said only say one, but patience, be patient. I have learned that definitely over COVID, that nothing is going to happen fast, and that we're still in the post-COVID blues of slowness. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely important to remember. Thank you, Rosemary. We have another question that's come through from Casey Lloyd. Thanks, Casey. Thank you so much for your insights. It's been fantastic to hear your thoughts and journeys. One thing that became apparent to me throughout COVID, especially as someone who creates work with vulnerable communities, was the issue of digital exclusion. Yeah, good point. As we start to open up the world, how can we blend live work and online work to give the audience the best access to art, theatre, conversations? Is this even possible? It certainly does make sense, Casey. Thank you for that. I wonder who might want to respond to that. So, you know, the digital has opened up, you know, Dylan, you were talking about opening up your work internationally, and but at the same time we need to be wary that the digital isn't always more accessible, and it relies on people having access to equipment. It can create its own barriers to access, relies on privacy sometimes. How can we how can we move forward with exciting hybrid work without making anything exclusionary?
Yeah, I think it's complicated, right? Because I think there's loads of different things in that. I think it's recognizing that like digital poverty exists and not everyone has the equipment or the tech that we think they all need. And I think there's different ways that we can do that. I think it's about in the first instance, I think it's about the performers or companies making it as easy as possible for an audience to engage with your work if you are doing it online. And so, for example, with House Never Wins, we deliberately chose Zoom and WhatsApp rather than like any fancy tech. And part of that was because of our limited technology at the time, but it was also because we were like, Zoom has become the thing that everyone has pivoted to. So there was a wider understanding of that. But we were also like, we know that not everyone will have used that. And we wanted it to be something that an audience from like, that like my grandma could play to like an 8-year-old could play. Like we were like, we need to find and sort of like the way of explaining this to everyone. So we made sure that every if people booked a ticket, they could contact us. We would also send out Zoom guides and WhatsApp guides to like explain the tech that we're using. And it can feel really like dumbing down, but if you give the people the option, it's not going to be like, we're not forcing anyone to read it, but it means that it's there. And so someone doesn't have to feel like, oh, I'm stupid for not understanding this thing. So I think that's part of it, is just about working out how you're going to explain and manage it. Also, we found, and we've got it here on this talk today, we were like having someone just focusing on like a support and like a technical support if you're doing anything live, just because stuff will go wrong on whatever sort of platform you're using, whether it's Zoom, whether it's some amazing VR tech experience, something is going to go wrong at some point and an audience member won't be able to access it, and you can't make it that the performance can't hold that. It has to, because that's the form that you're using. So that has to be adaptable. So you have to have people on hand who can deal with audience queries, provide that support, give them a contact number to like phone up if the entire computer goes down. I think it's also then about working in terms of reaching past digital poverty, is about working with venues. So if you're doing like a hybrid piece where part of the piece is experienced online, can the venue provide a space in real life where, I don't know if I've completely frozen. I don't know if people can still hear me.
Can definitely still hear you, Dylan.
Yeah, cool. So it's about whether like, can the venue provide like a space in real life that people can go to access it via an iPad or via a laptop if people don't have their own, and how can we think about ways of doing that? But then there's also those other like the access the other way is that like are people just going to view digital as the accessible version, and therefore we need to make sure that like venues and theatres don't cut wheelchair access and go, oh well, we've got it online so it's fine, and or like go, oh, the online version is captioned, And it's like, that's not integrated access, that's bog standard access. If you just stick a BSL interpreter or captioning on a live stream, that doesn't count. And how can we still make sure that we're making those creative choices and making the best choices for audiences to actually engage with the work? And if you're making work hybrid, I think it's about, it also shouldn't be that like the digital version is like a lesser version. If it's just going to be a lesser version, probably don't run it. I don't really necessarily see the benefit. If it's not as good as seeing as it in person, just make your in-person version more accessible, make that reach more people. Or so I think it's about, when we talk about making hybrid work, it's about going, well, what can be how can the experience be different if it's accessed online? And is there something that an online audience get that they don't get if they go and watch it in person? Maybe there's a way of like diversifying our audience, of going, okay, how can we appeal to people who want to access this online, and how can we engage people who want to access this in person? And maybe those audiences can speak to each other. Maybe you have productions where an online audience can affect what happens to an in-person audience, and so, or can it, like, maybe those like two audiences can speak. You've got to have a moment of connection whilst they're engaging. But I think we have to treat them as different audiences with different needs, and kind of tailor the piece for them in different ways, rather than, and I think if we just view it as all like, oh, it's all one audience, I think that's where we get into making stuff either inaccessible or accessible for either group.
Absolutely, thanks.
Sorry, that was kind of waffly.
Yeah, no, so many good recommendations there, absolutely. Kelly, you had looked like you were maybe going to come in on that question as well. So can I ask you the same question about ensuring accessibility of hybrid work?
Yeah, I sort of froze a while back. So I was like, oh, I don't know what's happening. And then I come in and I was like, oh, you're already answering it. Yeah, it was something we did with Room to Escape, actually, is we were really aware that when we put the call out for families, we didn't just want theatre literate, tech savvy families to join us. So we had extra budget for equipment for whoever needed it, and kind of support around all of that throughout the whole process. And that was through like the rehearsal process, as well as kind of through the show. And then on the show day, we had kind of partnered with lots of different kind of community spaces, because the families were all spread across the UK, so they were kind of not in one location. So we'd kind of partnered with community organisations in lots of different places, local to where the families were. And they would be also streaming the performance, and people could go to that as well and have a kind of collective experience of this other thing. So it's kind of a lot similar to what Dylan was saying, actually. I think there is a risk that people do go, oh, well, the digital version is the accessible version. And I think that has maybe started already happening. We are noticing that a little bit. But I think we just have to keep pushing back on it. And I think we just have to make work that isn't that. And I think people will, through seeing that actually you can have something that is digital and accessible and in all ways, but can only exist in the digital or can exist in the hybrids, and give you different experiences to both. I think only really by doing that, I think things will actually start to change.
Thanks, Kelly. We've just got one more question, which is actually to you again, Kelly. It's around, it's from Holly, and it's asking about community building and how live and analog and digital practices have enabled community building in a different way than before COVID. If you would like to respond to that.
Yeah. Well, kind of, as I said, the Room to Escape project, we had families from all over the UK. Usually that wouldn't be possible without COVID, because of the kind of digital. We did it all on Zoom, and we had rehearsals all on Zoom, and stuff like that. I think it gives people more option. I think it's really hard to get some people in theatre buildings. Sometimes I don't feel comfortable going. There's certain theatres I don't feel comfortable going in, and I work in theatre. So how must other people feel? And if you go, actually, it's not about that. I can meet you where you are, digitally, or we can have a phone conversation. I think people are more open. I had an old project from a very long time ago about CB radios. So my mum and dad met on a CB radio in the 80s, and I've always wanted to make a kind of digital live show about it, but kind of never really found the way in. And then it kind of came back around during COVID, and we were like, actually, this is a great project for lockdown because we can do it all on radio, and and we kind of, people could just sit in their cars listening to it, or, you know, and they don't have to, it doesn't have to be like on Zoom, or it doesn't have to be like on the internet. It can use the medium of radio and be a play. And we reached out to ex-CB radio users, and we did a little radio interview on like Dagenham's local radio station, and we had over 200 people get in touch with us, and it was actually people that I'd never encountered in all the different kind of community spaces that I'd been in before. It's because I was using a new medium. I was using radio, and people who may not go to the theatre, but they do listen to Time FM on a Friday morning on their way to work, were like, oh, and it kind of just sparked something. And actually it was really beautiful and really brilliant. And lots of people who just wanted to share their story and their memories of that time. I hope that's helpful. Sorry, I waffled on.
No, it is. It's really interesting hearing how you've actually formed an entirely new community around that particular medium. No, super interesting. I'm afraid we need to bring this session to a close. Thank you so much to our speakers. We do have another session in it is in 10 minutes at 12:25. The Zoom link is in the chat, and that's just going to be a discussion forum. So there's so much more I think we should talk about. I think we should talk about those issues with social media, and whether, you know, the power and the problems of social media. I think we should talk about more about, I'd love to hear, Dylan, about more about how audiences themselves were changing, what they were wanting in terms of interaction, the whole relationship with venues and gatekeepers. I'm also keen to hear if COVID itself has made it into your writing, or, you know, as a theme, and how, you know, in terms of the content of what you're actually writing about. So loads more I want to talk about, but let's do it at 12:25. Thank you again to our speakers. Please go and have a cup of tea, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes.
Perfect. Thanks so much.